Yes, here we go. It gets edited anyway. Right, so first of all, last week was about 600 people who watched the shir last week. We are once again in Tzirikal Chasidim here in Shari Chesed in Yerushalayim, and with the shir of the Al Shach HaKodesh. I would also like to give thanks to, for those who are looking very carefully, my new microphone. This is a gift from Torah Anytime, and of course the shirim will also go out in Torah Anytime as well, which is a big COVID. And they're about to have their fundraiser, and I've got a page, so I'm going to raise hopefully $5,000 in a couple of weeks' time for Torah Anytime, which is of course well worth raising funds for. The shir should also contribute for Refuah Shlema to Binyamin Zev ben Yafa Henienta and Rochel Levana Bas Shirley. We are in the Parsha of Yisro, extraordinarily interesting Parsha. And in the Parsha there, the Alshach is going to say some incredibly interesting things, but this week we're not just going to be talking on the great Alshach's Torah, but also in the Hasidic Torah of the Divrei Yoel, Rabbi Yoelish of Satmar. What else? Others as well. This is, I think you'll find this very interesting. And those at home, if you've got a Chumash, grab it and turn to Yisro. And it says, Vayishma Yisro, and Yisro heard, Cohen Midian, who was the Cohen of Midian. Chosin Moshe was the father-in-law of Moshe. Eskol asher asa Elokim lo Moshe of Yisrael. Everything that Elokim did to Moshe Yisrael, ki hoitzi Hashem is Yisrael, because Hashem took out Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. So the Alshach has got lots of questions to ask there. Well, let's just remind ourselves of the way the Alshach's mind works. Really, as I've mentioned before, it applies to all of the Meforshim. There's something which is apparently wrong with the Pasuk. Somebody brought out a book called What's Bothering Rashi? What's Bothering Rashi? In other words, there seems to be something wrong with Psukim. Two things to bear in mind. Hashem doesn't say, oops, there are no mistakes in the vocabulary of Hashem Yisborach. If something in the Pasuk seems to be wrong, you've got to say why, because God doesn't make mistakes. Or to put it slightly differently, God's good at Hebrew. And if there's a Pasuk that contains 10 words, and the message that the Pasuk seems to be telling us could be conveyed in 5 words, then you have to ask yourself, why does the author of the Pasuk, Hashem, put the other 5 words in? They must be teaching you something else. And we'll see that here. So let's do this again. Vayishma Yisro. So Yisro heard. Now Rashi tells us that Yisro, in actual fact, had 7 names. Sheva Shemus Nikra Lo, he had 7 names altogether. Reuel, which was his real name apparently. Yesa Yisro Choiv Chever Keni and Putiel. So these are all the names of Yisro. And then he tells us when these names apply to him in his life. I won't go through the whole list here, but the important thing to bear in mind is that he was called Yisro, says Rashi, after he became a ger, after he became a Jew, and after he'd done lots of good things, Ma'asim Tovim. The next words is Yisro, who is the Cohen Midian. Cohen Midian was, of course, as we know about Yisro, he was somebody who was desperately seeking the truth. He had been the high priest to every single idolatrous religion that existed in the world at the time. He rose in the ranks, becomes the high priest, the bishop, or whatever, the pope, sees that it's nonsense, goes on to the next one. Cohen Midian, and it's a scary thing to think of if he was the priest to all the idolatrous religions in the world at the time that also included child sacrifice. And then it says that he was Chosin Moshe. He was the father-in-law of Moshe. Now, what's wrong with this? What is wrong with this is rather obvious. That is to say, that Chosin Moshe, the whole thing, the problem is, when it says V'yishma Yisro, we just said that was the name he had when he was a Jew. Then it says Cohen Midian, that describes him before he was a Jew, when he was a priest to idolatry. And then it says Chosin Moshe, he was the father-in-law of Moshe. Well, we know that. That's what the first book of Exodus says. It tells the whole story of him fleeing from Paro and finding refuge with Yisro, and he marries one of his daughters. We know that. So why does it say it again here? So the Alshach here says something which is extremely brilliant. He says it's not telling you chronology. That's to say, the order, the historical, the order in time of things, because the time's wrong. When he was Yisro, he wasn't Cohen Midian. When he was Cohen Midian, he wasn't Yisro. It's telling you the methodology. The method of how somebody who was a Cohen Median, who must have engaged in child sacrifice, went on to become, as you mentioned before the Shia started, and I've told you many times, Rabbi Dessler says, if you're named in the Torah, you were a great person. But to be given a whole Parsha to yourself in the Torah, that's astonishing. Somebody who was engaged in child sacrifice went on to become somebody who gets a whole Parsha in the Torah. This is astonishing. It's telling you how he did it. How did he do it? And it's the first word, Vayishma. Now, how would you translate Vayishma? Listen, heard. Okay, listen, heard. So we're going to see there's an important. You've got to get this one right. Vayishma. Imagine you're at home, and you've gone to bed, and you're just nodding off to sleep when you hear a noise downstairs. Downstairs, we all live in apartments in Eretz Yisrael, so maybe there's no downstairs. Before we moved here, okay, when we're downstairs. Oh, but you hear, in the hallway outside, you hear a noise. What do you do next? You hear a noise, and then what do you do?
You try to listen.
Oh, you listen! And then you listen. You hear and you listen. The difference between hearing and listening is, we could be here in the show and maybe a car would go down the road here. You hear it, but you're not paying attention to it. Listening means to pay attention to it. It's telling you how he became the person that he became. That is to say, he was a listener. He listened. And we know that the Chazal tell us that the entire world knew what happened at Kriyas Yamsuf. They all heard about this. And of course, Rashi said, what did he listen? What did he hear? He heard two things. He heard Kriyas Yamsuf, and they also heard Mechomas Amalek. And that was the trigger that made him want to become Jewish. But it's two things, and that seems strange. Because the first one, I can understand him wanting to join the winning team. But the second one, I would say, because at the Mechomas Amalek, we nearly get completely destroyed. It was touch and go, as they say in English. Or that's an English expression. We won by the skin of our teeth. I don't know what the skin of the teeth means, but anyway, fine. It was just no more. Yeah, we nearly lost that battle. You can imagine him deciding maybe not after that. But it's both sort of got that for him. But certainly, Kriyas Yamsuf, the whole world, v'yivaka hamayim, it's in the plural. V'yivaka, the plural of the wine, because anybody with a glass of water, as I have or I had here, the glass of water itself would split in two. You could see the water in two. All around the world, they wanted to know what happened. What was this all about? Please grab a chumash somewhere from over there. They wanted to know what it was all about because they knew. And then they heard what happened, the destruction of the Egyptian empire. Wow. But the astonishing thing is, everybody heard it, but who listened? Everybody heard it, but who listened? Right, so there were two people. The two people were Yisro and Rochov. Rochov Hazoina. Rochov Hazoina, who eventually marries, who is a Zoina, who eventually go to Yeshua. The whole story of Yeshua, and he sends in the two spies. Rochov, who was a Zoina, and eventually ends up a Gioris. At the age of 10, she was 10 years of age when Kriyas Yamsuf occurred. When she was 50, 40 years later, the spies come in. Eretz Yisrael, Klal Yisrael comes to the border, and she saves the two spies, the two Meraglim of Yeshua there, and she said, because we know what happened at Kriyas Yamsuf. She was convinced by Hashem at that point. That's enough for her want to become Jewish. Two people, everybody heard. Two people listened. Two people listened. We'll talk more about that in just a second. But again, we have this problem of why is it that it's two things that cause him to want to become Jewish. The first one is Kriyas Yamsuf, right? Jewish people triumphant. And then the second one is Mechomas Amalek, Jewish people almost defeated. Why should that work? So of course, at that war, he sends out Yeshua. Yeshua has to go and fight. I think I told you last week, I heard this, someone of my Talmudim told me this. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I hadn't heard this before. Why didn't Moshe go and fight himself? Why did he send Yeshua? So the war, Amalek was able to attack us because we weren't learning Torah properly. We were learning Torah, but we weren't doing it with passion. And we weren't sort of like being a malim b'Torah. When you struggle to learn Torah. So why didn't Moshe go? Because Moshe had never struggled to learn Torah. I think I mentioned that to you last week. He was given it by Hashem on Mount Sinai. Hashem just put it into his mind. Boom. He tried to get it to learn it with him for 39 days. 48 days. Wouldn't go in. 49 days. All right, it goes in. So Moshe got the whole of the Torah as a free gift. But Yeshua, he worked at it. So it had to be Yeshua who goes out. But what happens? Moshe puts up his hands, Klal Yisrael wins. Moshe puts down his hands, Klal Yisrael loses. Eventually Moshe can't keep his hands up at all. So Hur and Aaron have to hold his hands up for him. And when he hears that, he says, oh, now I'm going to become Jewish. He's got Moshe Rabbeinu is his personal Rebbe, his personal tutor for 40 years. Before that, didn't become Jewish. And Moshe is Rabbeinu, the teacher. That's the title we give him. Imagine you could have Moshe Rabbeinu as your private Rebbe. Didn't do anything. Well, it did something, but it didn't clinch it for him. What clinches it for him is when he's able to see, I have a role to play here. There's something for me here. I think I didn't mention this to you last week. You know that Hasidic, Yiddish old song, Wie der Rebbe tanzt? Wie der Rebbe tanzt, wie der Rebbe tanzt, tanzen alle Hasidim. Right? So, and the Rebbe schloft. It's good, but you play it with the kids. So you do the whole sound of it, schloff and all. So there was this, obviously this nonsense about, the Hasidim have no individuality. They're all just sheep. Whatever the shepherd does, then they all do the same thing, which of course is nonsense. Afal Pikein, that's what people might think. But here, what Yitro gets, is the fact he's got a role to play. He's not just one of the Hasidim, wie the Rebbe, wie the Moshe tanzt, wie the Moshe schloft. It's, I have something to do here. I have something to contribute. And Chazal say, the Peladic of Chazal is actually a Zohar. The Zohar says, a tzaddik gomer cannot exist in heaven except if he's got a levush to wear. And the levush is a nefesh hager, is the soul of a ger. A tzaddik gomer cannot exist in heaven unless he has got a special garment to wear, the soul of a ger. What does that mean? So, what does a garment do? I'm leaving aside high fashion. Why do we wear clothes? It keeps you warm, right? It keeps us clothed. It protects us against the environment. Okay. Ultimately, that is the role of a ger. It's symbiosis. Do you know the word symbiosis? Symbiosis is shutfus, a mutual shutfus, almost like a husband and a wife. They have different roles to play. The husband has his role, the wife's got their role. Together, they're mashlim each other. A ger is mashlim an Ezra, somebody who's born Jewish. He can do things, or she can, if it's a geras, like Ruth, they were going to bring something that's going to help the other. The other Moshe Lazar says it's like a peri, right? A peri, I think of an apple or an orange. The skin, the outside, protects the inside, right? That means the existence of the skin is not for itself, it's for the fruit. The fruit can't exist without the skin. There's a shutfus that goes on here. We need, and what does Moshe Rabbeinu say to Yisro when Yisro wants to go back to convert his own people? Don't go. You'll be for us le'inaim. You'll see things that we don't see. You come from a different background. I mean, one of my rabbis famously told me, why does it say that the place that Baal Tshuva stands, a tzaddik ben tzaddik can't stand? So he said, imagine Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was an Amora who was an Amora and went off the derech, a bit like Acher. And his taiva was Geneva. And then he comes back. He's a real Baal Tshuva. Was from, went off, comes back. Now, so my Rebbe pointed out that if I was to be a Rosh Hashiva, if I was to make a yeshiva, or if I was a Meshgiach of yeshiva, and I was making, certain gedorim, certain gezeras in the yeshiva to protect against things being stolen, I think it would be pretty makel. Because I would not expect my Talmidim to steal. I've never wanted to steal. But for some people, it's a big taiva. They love stealing, and they're proud about the things. Have you ever heard of a book called Tintin? Sure. A comic book, Tintin. Famous Tintin books. So there was in the Tintin books, there was one, I can't remember which one it is. They're looking for, there's a guy who stole wallets. Oh, they're after some guy, and it's all on the bookshelf like we have at ours for him, and where he stole this wallet and this wallet and this. He's all proud of that. Aganav's like that. Reish Lakish, if he was the Rosh Hashiva, then his Gezeras, his Tekonas against Geneva will be much more machmir than mine, because he knows the taiva of it. Don't leave us, Moshe says, pleads with Yisro. You'll be for us le'inaim, from your different background to us. When you have been a Kaimer, the high priest to every Avodah Zarah in the world, you'll see things that we won't see. It might seem to us innocuous, innocent, no problem whatsoever. Because, no, it isn't. You've been there. So there's a shufas, there's a relationship between the two. A tzaddik gomer, by definition, has a hashpah on his chassidim, but also in the whole world. To such a degree that there will be gerim that will be drawn to Yiddishkeit as a consequence of your tzidkus. You can't get into heaven unless you've got a garment to wear. As it were, Nomi can't get to Shemayim, who was a great tzedekah, unless she's got a nefesh, which is a garment to wear, which is the neshama of Rush. You get the idea? So when Yisro hears or understands that it's not just that I'm a chosid in the funny song, which is not true. I'm going to do the exact same things as Moshe Rabbeinu. No, I've got something to contribute to Klal Yisrael. And of course, as soon as the Geras is successful and he's matzliach, immediately he takes on the role of the father-in-law. What are you doing? Standing here all day, paskening shilas on your own. You're going to damage your health. This is not good. I don't want my daughter to be, an almona, a real father-in-law sort of thing. Apologies to the I'm a father-in-law as well. And yeah, Ashvel. Yeah, and obviously Ashvel. Fine. Good. So that's the story of Yisro. He's somebody who listens. So it's because he listens, and incidentally, of course, Rochav as well, that he's able to reach something great. But there's another part here, and that is that strange extra word, or extra two words, Chos and Moshe. Why does it tell us Chos and Moshe? Because it all goes together. It's not talking chronology, it's talking methodology. Vayishma, he was a listener, and he took what he listened to and put it into effect straight away. And then, of course, even though somebody was very low, you can go up that madriga. But last thing as well, which is so important, Chos and Moshe, he had a kesher to a tzaddik. Anybody who wants to, in anything you want to do, you need a teacher. He had a teacher, that was Moshe, who was able to focus his passion, his interest, his curiosity, and be mashlim it. That was him. The problem, of course, is that Rochav didn't have any of those things. Rochav Hazoina, because only two people listened. Everybody heard what Kriyas Yamsuf, but two people listened. Yisro, and then he becomes Jewish. But Rochav, 40 years later, because she was 10 when that happened, as I mentioned before. And then 40 years later, she's still waiting to be Makabel Gerish. She protects Yeshua's spies, because I heard what went on, but she didn't have a Moshe teaching her. She didn't have, that kesher. So how did she do it? That's for another shir. But she, that saw, same thing. She was a listener. Yes. Right. But then what do you do when you listen? How do I take the Torah that I feel, that I understand as Hashem, and He's got to have given us a message, and that's must be something called the Torah, or whatever you want to call it. But there was nobody to teach her what that was. Yisro had somebody to teach him. But she, when you think about it, what happens to Yisro? As a Machlokas and Chazal, what happened to him? When he goes back to try and convert his people, that wasn't successful. They were the Kenites. The Kenny, who, when Shaul goes to fight against and destroy Amalek, who's sitting amongst them? The descendants of Yisro. He wasn't, his people, but her. But Rochav Hazoina, 8 Kohanim Gedolim. I can't remember how many kings, I think it was 3 or 4 kings. Nevi'im, there were 7 or 8 Nevi'im, and Cholda HaNevi'os. Astonishing. But that's for another shir. I'll not do that one tonight, I will not get anywhere. So so our question is, in both cases, what would make them unique? Everybody heard, but she listened. There is, we all know Pirkei Avos, and the fifth parak of Pirkei Avos in Mishnah Yutes. Incidentally, sometimes the Mishnahs are different. They're set out differently. I once asked Rebbe Vom Gurevitz, the Rosh Yeshiva Gateshead, one of my great rabbis, does he know why? He didn't actually know a reason why. I don't know why they're sometimes set out why. Because sometimes you're looking for it and you can't find it. It's two before. But anyway, a new test. Kol mi sheyesh biyodoi shlosha devorim halolo. Interesting lotion. I would have thought it said midos, but it says devorim. Kol mi sheyesh biyodoi shlosha devorim halolo mitolmido shel Avram Avinu. If you got these three things, if you possess these three things, and I'm going to introduce to you a huge chutzpah in a moment because I want to add to them. Hold on. If you got these three things, you are a Talmud of Avram Avinu. And if you got three other things, you're a Talmud of Bilam. You won't bother with that. What are the three things that makes you a Talmud or a child, a Yorish, a descendant of Avram Avinu? Ayin Toiva, Ruach Nemucha, and Nefesh Shefola. So let's quickly look at the Bartanura. It says, Ayin Toiva, Mestapet b'ma sheyesh lo. You're perfectly happy with what you have. You're not jealous of anybody, giving them an ayin hora. So that's what ayin tova means. And you want other people to be successful. Fine. What does ruach nemucha mean? A nova yasira. Tremendous humility. Someone like me. You've got tremendous humility. And fine, so Avram Avinu was a known of, and fine. Of course, he said, I'm just dust and earth. But Nefesh Shefela, what does that mean? Nefesh, it says the Bartanura, Zahiris uprishas minataiva. You separate yourself from prisha, from taiva. Fine. Again, according to the Bartanura, it's midos, no? So it doesn't use the word midos, it says devorim. But as it says devorim, I would like to add to that. If you're a Talmud of Avram Avinu, I would like to add that you're curious. You're curious. And you're also a thinking person. I wanted to add, to be a Jew is automatically curious. And of course, Avram Avinu, when he comes out of the cave, once the Gezerah for the death of all the boys under Nimrod, very much like a precursor to the Paro story, he's shown by his magicians there's going to be a boy born who's going to challenge Nimrod's authority, kill all the boys. So his mother, Amos-Leah Bas Carnival, hides him away in a cave, and then eventually comes out, and this is in the Chovos Levovos, when he comes out, he sees the world for the first time. And there's machlokes what age he was, but I think most people say he was about 4, and he sees the world for the first time. Consequently, he doesn't take it for granted. And he says to himself, whoa, how does this all work? How did this come to be? So he thought to himself, well, there's two possibilities. Either somebody made it, or it made itself. Let's start with the second one first. It made itself. If it made itself, you'd have to ask yourself the question, did it exist before it existed? Did it make itself before it existed or after it existed? If it made itself before it existed, how does nothing make something? If it made itself after it existed, then it already existed. Now, I don't know what you were thinking about when you were 4 years old, but I was thinking about kicking a football, right? Or being a cowboy. That sort of thing. But Avram Avinu, who was an Eloi, at the age of 4, he was thinking like that. Astonishing stuff. He's curious. And he's thinking. I would like to add that to the list. If you've got that, you're a Talmud of Avram Avinu. If you've got that midah, or that you possess that quality, you're a Talmud of Avram Avinu. So Yisro, by definition, had that quality. He's looking, he's searching, he's rejected all these, and he's thinking. So when it says Shema, it means you are thinking. You're listening and you're thinking. We're qualifying this a little bit more. I don't know if you've learnt Divrei Yoel, but the Divrei Yoel is a fabulous, fabulous sefer, and it always attracted me, first of all, because I was a bit of a chassid of the Satmar Rebbe, an admirer of him, and second of all, because his style is very much like the Alshich. He'll ask 5 or 6 questions and then give an answer. I don't know if you've learnt it. But as we go on to say, as the Pasuk, I've closed the Chumash too soon, but it says that when, after it tells us about what Yisro heard, And then it says he has a shmuz as Moshe Rabbeinu, and in Pasuk test Vayichad Yisro al kol hatayva asher osa Hashem Yisro asher atzilam miyad Mitzrayim. So Vayichad Yisro, what does Yichad Yisro mean? So Rashi says what Rashi says, which we're not going to go into. I want to read to you what the Satmar Rebbe says. Vayichad Yisro Omar b'Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin Tzadik Dalet says it's a machlokas Rav v'Shmuel. Now listen carefully to this Gemara because it's going to be tricky. Rav v'Shmuel. Rav Omar shehever cherev chada al bisrei. Rav says that he took a sharp knife and he circumcised himself. I'm not at time so far to find out why he did it himself. There's plenty of people that could have done it for him. But anyway, apparently he circumcised himself. Okay, Avram Avinu circumcised himself. Maybe it's something to do with that. I don't know. He did it as well. Perish Rashi, Shemol es atzmai ben his gair. That was the moment of his gerus. Ushmuel Omar, but Shmuel disagrees, and V'yichad he says, Omar, shenase chedudim al bisrei. That he had little bumps in his skin. When you're scared or you're cold, your skin sort of like... So when he heard what had happened to the Mitzrim, he got sort of like a bit what's a good word for that? A bit... goosebumps. He was distressed, and goosebumps came, okay? Perish Rashi, he was very upset, al mefeles Mitzrayim, about the fall of Egypt. And that's quite different. The first one is a simcha, right? I'm becoming a Jew, this is gewaldig, I've rejected all this garbage, all this avodah zorah, and now he's really upset. The other opinion, Shmuel, Omer Rav, and the Gemara goes on to say, Rav says, Haina de Omri Inshi, you're quite right. That's that famous saying that people say, Geura ad osra dori lo tavazi aroma kamai. If somebody is a ger or has gerus in his family, even if it was 10 generations ago, which is a way of saying forever, never make fun of goyim, of non-Jewish people. Aramai, that's that the censor has got in there. Should say non-Jewish people. Never make fun of non-Jewish people in front of somebody who's got that yichus, has got that in the background. But you see, this Gemara, as the Satmarov says, doesn't make any sense at all. So we're having a malchus. I'll be Rav, you can be Shmuel. Okay? So I say, what does it mean? It means gewaldige thing. He did bris milah, so happy to become a Jew. Did it himself. Gewaldig. And Shmuel says, no. It means, the V'yichad means he was upset because of the death of the Egyptians. And then I say, oh yeah, that's what people say. Don't mention in a derogatory way non-Jewish people in front of somebody who's got gerus to 10 generations. I'm just supported your argument. Rav and Shmuel are supposed to argue with each other. And now Rav has turned around after Shmuel gives his advice. Oh yeah, you're right. That's what people say. I thought, I'm supposed to be against you. I've got a different shita. So he says a very interesting thing. Tzarech Lahavin says that it's not Rebbe. He's talking Lamar al Tzadik Godel. How could it possibly be that a Tzadik Godel, like Yisro, ki Yisro, that he would be upset after these Nazis who are trying once again to destroy Klal Yisrael and were themselves destroyed as a consequence? He's upset about that? It should be, yes! Ha ha! Take that! Lo nemazeh ela b'stam gerim. When Rav says his shita, he's sticking to his shita. His shita is that he was happy. Bichad doesn't mean he's upset. He's happy to become a Jew. So why is he supporting Shmuel? Because we're talking about Yisro. For Yisro, I'm disagreeing with you. But I agree with you for any other person who's got gerus in their background. Then don't say nasty things about non-Jewish people in front of them. That will upset them. But don't chalila to think that the great tzaddik Yisro, who gets a whole Parsha named after himself in the Torah, would be upset by such a thing. That's an impossibility. So, he's somebody who listens, he's somebody who thinks, and is somebody who acts on what he's thinking. So I want to tell you something which is absolutely brilliant from, and now we've left the Hasidic world, we'll jump over to the Litvish world, and we'll look at Rabbi Yerucham. Rabbi Yerucham here, in Das Chacham Musar, in page Shin Nun Vov, it's Maimar Kuf Ches. So now, as we're in Yerushalayim and not very far from the Mir, it's appropriate to quote the great Rabbi Yerucham, who is so brilliant. I can never make up my mind which and people can't, not just me, which was the greatest mind, both whose background, of course, is Kelm, and both mashgichim in yeshivas, Rabbi Dessler, mashgiach of Ponevezh, or Rabbi Yeruchel, mashgiach of Mir. Two different styles. I've told you before, Rabbi Dessler, if you learn Rabbi Dessler, particularly if you're a Kalta Litvak like me, then you're seeing new stuff all the time. Although I learn the Alshach, so I'm a bit into it. They sometimes call the Alshach the first Chassidish Sefer, by the way. But it's full of new stuff. Rabbi Yeruchel doesn't bring you new stuff. He just shows you old stuff that you think you knew and shows you that you haven't understood it at all. You have to go tear it all up and go starting all over again. So he says something very interesting. He's talking about the Indian of miracles. Miracles and how do they work. So he says there's a difference between a nes nister and a nes nigla, which is obvious. And as we're coming up to Purim, and then straight after that we come up to Pesach. I'm sorry for any ladies who are watching this share at home. If you say the word Pesach, there's great wailing and you get the idea. Right. So basically, when it comes to Purim, it's Nes Nister, right? And that's of course the whole thing about Esther, Vani, Anachi, Aster, Pone, Bayamahu. And then when it comes to Pesach, then you can't miss Hashem. He's, to use the rather unfortunate English phrase, he's in your face. And the magicians of Egypt, the Khatumi Mitzrayim, the Avodah Zarah priests said, Etz Be'Elokim. So at Pesach you can't miss Hashem, and Purim you have to look to see him. But says Rabbi Yeruchel, what is the difference? Shenista yecholim od litlis b'teva. As long as you're able, if you are able to assume, to hang it, as they say, a meiser, a nes on teva, then that's a nes nister. The gamni legol ein kol mibli shakel etas kol boy b'chlo. Aber ba'atz b'shovim him b'nisim. In other words, says Rabbi Yeruchel, it's a question of how you view it. If you view it as a miracle, and both are miracles, then it's an open miracle. But if you can hide it, if it can be hidden, and you could say, oh, it was a natural event, that's called a nes nister. Really, it's the same thing. Therefore, it's the reception is going to get in the eyes of the person who beholds the miracle that determines whether it's a nes nigla or a nes nister. And then he gives an example. This is astonishing. How do we have time? Do we have time for me to tell you? Yeah, good, we do have time for me to tell you the story. My granddaughter came to visit me with my great-grandson just about 3 years ago, and because she was stuck at home, her husband's in the Mir learning, so she was a bit lonely and fed up. And so she decided, my Zadie lives here. She's from it. Zadie, can I come over? Can I hang out with you? I said, sure. I said, let's go for a walk. Let me take you down, and I'll show you just in Nachlaot on the other side of the end of our street. You come to Bitzalel, and the other side there you've got a different, that's just going a little bit beyond Rechavia. As there's beautiful little alleys and little streets, and it's really, really good. So we went for a walk with the grandson down there. And we were walking, and I told her, I just heard recently that there's lots and lots of Christian missionaries there. Do you know that? Nachlaot, yeah. Because it's full of young people, and they're looking for people who are a bit disturbed, maybe because they've just done their army service, they're vulnerable. And she said, by coincidence, I hadn't told her that yet, she said, Zadie, I remember there's a story about you hitting a Christian missionary. And I said, no. But in Manchester, in England, where I used to live, Sunday was, of course, not uncommon for on the front door. I said, I think this is a story you're getting mixed up with. So once, my late wife, on both occasions in these stories, my late wife was, getting over cancer. It was a whole thing. It was balble. I came to the door, opened the door, and there was two guys standing there with Bibles in their hands, Christian Bibles. Shouldn't have picked up a sefer for that. Sorry, I'll have to. So they started their spiel, and I said, is that a Christian Bible in your hand, which, as you probably know, has got our Tanakh in it as well, before you get to their sheker. And I said, so they started to say something. I said, could you turn to Genesis? Could you turn to Genesis? Gracious. Could you turn to Genesis chapter 46, verse 15. And so they turn to Genesis chapter, here we go. I will turn to it now. It's easy to remember, Memvov, Tesvov, Mutu. So they turn to Memvov, Tesvov, and there the Pasuk says, it's making the cheshbon as to the Yidden who are going down to Mitzrayim. It's talking about the Bnei Leah. And it says, Eli Bnei Leah, Asher Yoda Liyaakov Bepadan Aram, these are the children of Leah, all the families and their children, who were born to Yaakov when they lived in Padan Aram, but Estina and Dina, of course, Bitai, Kol Nefesh, Bonav of Nosov, all of his children, sons and daughters, Shloshim V'Sholosh. 33. But of course, if you count them, there's not 33. There's 32, as Rashi points out. And therefore, why is the cheshbon wrong? It's talking about Yocheved. Because Yocheved was born, her conception was outside Mitzrayim, and she was born just as they crossed the border to Mitzrayim. Right, so that's the missing 33rd person. But I was having fun, I decided to have fun. I said, turn to chapter 46, verse 15. So they turned to chapter 46. And I said to him, what does it say? 33. Count them. So they go back and 32. And you can see, and there's two, of course, and they're looking at each other. And I'm going, so, and I said, problem? Maybe you made a mistake. Count it again. Still a problem? Maybe you can have fun. It depends on how cruel you want to be. Anyway, so I got them to count it 3 times. And I said, it says 33, doesn't it? Yes. And God says 33. And he doesn't make mistakes, right? Yeah. But it's only 32, aren't there? I said, do you know why there's only 32 and God says 33? Well, I do. And until you do, don't come back. Poof, and slam the door. Yeah. Fine. Okay, so you get the idea. So in this, an astonishing thing says Rabbi Yerucham on this Nakuda. The who was the 33rd, the missing 33rd person we were talking about. So Rashi says, as we said, Shoshu be protem. If you count them, you basically only find 32. Elazu Yecheb, but it's Yechebed. Shenol the Bein HaChamis. Fine. But the Ibn Ezra, he says, no, that can't possibly be right. Listen to this. Obedrosh ki Yecheved nol the Bein HaChamis. And this idea that it was Yecheved was born Bein HaChamis, which incidentally is a Gemara in Bava Basra and Kuf Kof. Gam Zetem, that's astonishing, says the Ibn Ezra. Lama lo hiskar akos v'apela sha'osa imo sha'olid Moshe v'hoya bas kof lamet shana. Because if it's Yocheved, and therefore, now how does this work? So if it's Yocheved, and Moshe Rabbeinu, that's Moshe Rabbeinu's mother, and how long were we in Egypt? We were in Egypt for 210 years. And then Moshe leads us out. How old is Moshe when he leads us out? 80. Right? So that means he was 80. 40 years he was Egyptian prince, then he runs away and then he comes back. So therefore, if you take 80 away from 210, it's 130. Well, that means, therefore, by definition, Yocheved must have been 130 years of age, says the Ibn Ezra, when she gave birth to Moshe. You with me? You agree? Let's do that again. Okay. So the question is that the missing 33rd person. Rashi says it's Yocheved, right? As we mentioned before. So if it's Yocheved, says the Ibn Ezra, she was born when they came to Egypt. They're going to be in Egypt for 210 years. When they left, Moshe was 80, right? 40 years with Yisro, 40 years an Egyptian prince. So he was 80 when we left. If you take 80 away from the 210 years we're in Egypt, then his mother must have been 130 when she gave birth to him. And that can't possibly, says the Ibn Ezra, be true. Not, he says, because Hashem couldn't do a miracle. I mean, of course. But when he did a miracle with Sarah Imenu and gave her a child at 90, the Torah told us all about it. 90 garnished, 130 geschmack. And yet there's no mention of it. So therefore it has to be Yaakov. So the Ibn Ezra rejects Rashi's pshat. He's even rejecting the Gemara's pshat, it seems. And he says it's Yaakov who's the missing 33rd person. He's part of the Keshbet. But the Ramban defends Rashi, which is unusual because he usually attacks Rashi. But the Ramban defends Rashi, and he says this, I want to tell you something which is true and runs all the way through the Torah. It's a rule. If a miracle is foretold, you're told beforehand by a Novi or a Malach that the miracle is going to happen, and it does happen, then the Torah mentions it. Because, of course, a Malach said that Sarah was going to have a baby. But if nobody tells you that the baby, a miraculous birth is going to happen, the Torah doesn't mention it. That's all. Why doesn't it mention it? Which was the Ibn Ezra's raya that it can't possibly be her. He said, because the Torah didn't mention this. No, the Torah wouldn't mention it. If the miracle was predicted, foretold by a Novi or a Malach, then it tells you. Sarah. If it wasn't foretold, then it doesn't mention it. Now, but what's the difference between the two? Of course, Sarah's miracle was inferior to that of the Chebet. But we only get excited about a miracle if something, well, that's what the Malach said, and that's what the Novi said. But if you don't have that, if we can dismiss it as a freak, something beteva, but very unusual, then it's not a miracle. In our eyes, psychologically in our eyes. Do you get this? I'll make it even better. We know there's a famous right at the end of Parshas Lech Lecha, beginning of Parshas Lech, at the end of Parshas Noach. At the end of Parshas Noach, it tells us about the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu. And what does it say there? So I can just find this. So it says, Vayiterach Shivim Shana. And Terah was 70 years of age, V'yolad is Avram. And Avram was born. And it's Nocham, it's Horan. Nocham and Horan. Ve'ela taught us Terach, then it tells you, the Yichus, etc. And of course, we know that Aviyam was Haran, and Haran was killed during the lifetime of Terach at Ur-Kasdim. We all know that famous story. Fine. V'yikach Avram, V'nochar, I said Avram. V'yikach Avram, V'nochar, Lahem Noshim, so they married women, right? And of course, Sarai was the wife of Avram. But he's Sarah a Koran, she couldn't have any children. V'yikach Terach is Avram. Terah takes Avram, his son, Lot ben Haran, and he takes Lot, the son of Haran, his nephew, ben Benoi, Sarah Kalos, and his daughter-in-law, Eshes Avram, the wife of Avram, Benoi, his son, V'yitza itam Ur-Kasdim, and they go from Ur-Kasdim, Lechas Atz Canaan, to go to the land of Canaan, V'yova ad Haran, and they got to Haran, V'yishashom, and they stayed there. This happens a lot. People want to live in Eretz Yisrael, hope to live in Eretz Yisrael, but somehow or other they never get to do so. There's a wonderful speaker, a very interesting fellow called Yaakov Osher Sinclair. He teaches Or Sameach. He used to be a famous Hollywood actor. I wouldn't tell you that except he talks about it. Anyway, so he told me once he was lecturing in Florida, saying Shirim in Florida, and you probably know, or maybe you don't, Florida has a nickname, a very unfortunate nickname. Do you know what it's called? Sorry? Yeah, God's waiting room. God's waiting room. Because so many old Jews from New York retired to Florida, right? It's called God's waiting room. So he was waiting in the lobby for a car to take him to where he was saying Shirim. And there was bit cruel, but there's 4 old guys sitting at a table. And he overheard these 4 guys from New York speaking. So one said, I think I'm going to move to Eretz Yisrael. His friend said, that's a great idea. Yeah, I think I'm moving to Israel. Great, Mazel Tov. Yep, I'm going to move to Israel. So what you waiting for? I'm waiting till it's too late. Sad. I'm waiting till it's too late. And so often people do wait until it's too late. I'm not trying to become, I've only been here for 11 months. Have you noticed that people, as soon as they move here, even if they're very Haredi, suddenly become big Zionists? To everybody, why aren't you moving here? You should be here. You've moved, Rubenstein, you're 69, and suddenly you're telling everybody, Musa Droshes, why don't you move here? You just moved here 10 months ago, when you were 70. Suddenly everybody's got to move here because you moved here. Anyway, leaving that aside. So let's go back to this. The Yichar Terach Zavra B'Noach V'Etzlot, and they move and they get stuck at Haran. The last posuk in Noach. So Terach lived for 5 years and 200 years, 205 years, Shona, Vayomas Terach Haran, and he dies in Haran. Fine. And then, straight to Lech Lecha. First time Hashem speaks to Avram Avinu. Etc. And of course he goes, and he takes with him his wife and his family, and it says, Avram ben Chomesh Shonim B'Shibim Shona B'Tzitzim B'Haran. And he was 75 years of age when he went to Haran. Now, the way the Pasuk concludes the end of Noach, it rather looks as though he only left after his father had died. Doesn't it? Because the last Pasuk says, V'yimei Terach, and Terach was 205 years of age, and he died in Haran. And then it says, Avram Lech Lecha, Avram went to Eretz Yisrael. So the way the Torah writes it, makes you think that he only left after his father died. But Rashi says that's obviously not true. No. Different answer. So Rashi says, hold on. Obviously it's the case that he lived for much longer. How much longer? 60 years. So why does the Torah write in such a way to suggest that he died before Avram left? Reason number one, because from a Jewish hashkafa point of view, if you're a Rasha, and his father was a Rasha, then you're considered dead. You may be walking, you may be talking, you may be eating, but you're a walking corpse who eats and talks and eats and talks and stuff, right? So you're a walking corpse. So because a Rasha is considered dead, a tzaddik is considered alive once they're dead, but a Rasha is considered dead once he's alive. Answer number one. So when it says, that it suggests that he's died, he has died. From a hashkafa point of view, he's dead. But there's another answer. Rashi says because the Torah wants to hide the fact that he left his father alone for 60 years, so that people won't turn around and say, Avram, the first Jew, you just think is so frum, huh? What about that mitzvah of Kibbud Av V'Em? Are you telling me that the first Jew left his poor old father alone for 60 years? What happened to Kibbud Av V'Em? Hypocrites. In order that people won't think that, it writes it to hide the fact that his father was left for another 60 years without a son. To which Rabbi Yerucham says, what nonsense is this? What sort of answer is Rashi giving? Any child has already told us that Terach was 70 when Avram was born. Avram was 75 when he left. If you add 70 and 75 is 145. If you can't take that away from 205, it's clear that he left his father for 60 years. So what's Rashi saying? So Rabbi Yerucham says, you don't understand the Rashi. What Rashi is telling you is, if you want to cover the truth, if you want to draw a veil, there's a mechitza veil there, a thin cloth over the truth, it need only be the thinnest of veils. Because people don't look, people don't think. People don't look, people don't think. What was the nature of Avram Avinu? He's a thinker. What's the nature of Yisro and Rochov? They're thinkers. They're curious and they're thinkers. Apart from the good midas that you have to have, but you also have to be a thinker. Nearly finished. So let's stick with Pondiv Yeshiva, the Sifsei Chaim. Chaim Friedlander was the Talmud Mufka of Rabbi Dessler, and as it were, stepped into his position of the Mashgiach of Ponevezh. He says in his wonderful Sefer Sifsei Chaim, in Moedim Aleph, he says the following thing. Shenina Ba'ovas, it says in Pirkei Avos, Aleph Yud Dalet, Hillel Omer, Hillel famously says, Im Einani li mili, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Because Shenina Atzmi Ma'ani, and if I am for myself, what am I? Ve'im lo achshav emasai, and if not now, when? Bir Hadover, from Shari Tshuva, Rabbeinu Yoina, Perik Kofov. If a person is not willing to change himself, what good will Musar do? You can have the best Musar in the world. It will not work. Don't let a person ever think that the change within himself is going to come from outside you. The words of Musar that really have an impact on you is only the first spark. But whether you're going to take that spark and blow it into a flame, that's your job. And after that, it's up to you to change your ways and behavior as a consequence of the Isuras you've just heard. If not, all the Musar in the world won't help you. And he says, a person can hear a fantastic Musar from a great Darshan, a great Maggid, and beyond Shoma, but if it goes into your heart and the day that you hear it, I feel a Shema Divri Musar Niflam, even the most brilliant Musar in the world, but your Yitzhar will make you forget all about it, unless you take it and apply it straight away. I remember I was once walking down the street in Manchester, in a street called King's Road, in the middle of the, as they say, the Yiddish Gegend, in the Jewish area, and a car screeched up beside me. And a guy jumped out, and I looked and wondered what was going on. He said, Rabbi Y.Y. Rubinstein, he said. I knew the answer. Yes, I said. Do you remember me, he said. And I said, You spoke in our shul in Leeds. Leeds is a town about an hour north of Manchester. You spoke in our shul in Leeds 4 years ago. I was in the fourth row. And there was about 300 people there. Right? Similar sort of numbers as we are here tonight. And he said, and you were brilliant. I still remember the joke you told. So I said to him, what joke did I tell? And he said, he told me the joke. I'd forgotten all about it, but it was a good joke. And then I said to him, what else did I say? And he said, No, he said it was brilliant. And who am I to deny it? But it didn't. He took the joke, but he didn't take the brilliance that might have changed his life. Unless you take it and allow it to change it, it won't change you. The whole world heard. But who listened? Yisro and Rochav. Because to be a real Jew, to become a Jew and be a real Jew, you need to have, as we said, you have to have an ayin toiv, and you have to have no taiv, all those wonderful midas. But you also have to be somebody who's curious, who thinks, who listens, and then takes it and turns it into something real that changes you straight away. Otherwise, it will get lost, just like it did for the rest of the world, but not for Yisro and not for Rochav.